Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and back by popular demand, I would go through some faction versus faction videos here. I did have a couple of requests. I had been working on some other series, so it has taken me some time to get to this, come back to this series. So I apologize for those of you that have sent me some requests, but I will work on some of those going forward here. The first one that I had received was the Adepta Sororitas versus the Astra Militarum. And I think this will be the video for today, and I think it should be very helpful for you if you are struggling with this matchup. But first, if there's any certain faction versus faction videos that you are interested in watching and you're really struggling with some matchups, just send me some comments, and then those that I get most frequently or by popular demand, I tend to focus on those first, assuming I'm not in the middle of a different series. And if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. So the Adepta Sororitas versus the Astra Militarum. Not to upset the people who have been asking me for this video, but typically this should be massively in the Adepta Sororitas favor, because especially with how they are post-patch, and assuming that the bugs that the Adepta Sororitas get to benefit from are still in function. I hope that some of those will be patched out, and so it won't be so lopsided, because right now the Adepta Sororitas are pretty broken, which doesn't feel good for anybody. But I suspect actually the people who have been playing this game the longest are the ones that may actually have the most difficulty with this matchup, and that's because both of these factions have changed pretty substantially since their first release. So the big thing is the Astra Militarum actually used to kind of struggle with heavily armored assaults. And in the past, what you do with the Adepta Sororitas is you usually do a transport rush, either with rhinos or with your immolators, and that would be highly effective. Now that the Lehman Russ tanks all have their las cannon attacks having a shorter cooldown, the tank commander has the ability to give people double shots. The Vanquisher cannon has become very powerful, and there's lots of other tank options and very strong anti-armor options with the heavy weapons teams and things like that. Generally, you do not want to just do a blind transport rush, because originally when this came out, you'd just go full transport, and you still want to do a little bit of that, and I'll kind of go through my build example to kind of explain the reasoning. But in the old way, what you do is do like immolators with multi-meltas, because they would be highly effective against vehicles, and you could unload the immolator with some melee forces or some flamers to clear out the infantry that are in the way, and then you charge in with your sister Repentia, your canonist, somebody else that would have some anti-armor, and then your rhinos would be in there. They'd be popping some smoke to give your guys some defensive bonuses, and then Celestians would come out and you'd be sitting there shooting them with the multi-melta in addition to the Repentia. Use a hospital for some double attacks, and the Astra Militarum player wouldn't know what hit them. Now, unfortunately, that's not nearly as effective, and you need to have more dynamics in that, because they are much, much better at taking out vehicles, and because the buffs that the tank commander will give you, they can totally annihilate transport before it even can reach them, especially if you're just out in the open, say with like the Salt Exchange matchup. And then the units I used to recommend that you'd bring against the Adepta Sororitas, since they've changed how those units work with crack grenades going to different units and everything, it's just a totally different situation. So if you're trying to use those old strategies, you may occasionally get it to work, but you're going to be doing an uphill battle. So but some of those strategies are still the same, because if you're playing as the Adepta Sororitas, you're going to want to be charging in there, killing any infantry that are in the way, doing your flamers, get the hospitaler out, buff as many of your guys as you can, pop some smoke, and then run in through the overwatch while you're safe, and then close the gap, and then try to lock guys into melee so then the tanks have nowhere to go. The big thing is there's going to be tons of heavy flamers in the Astra Militarum's roster, so those should be your #1 priority to kill. because they're going to be able to counter pretty much everything other than a vehicle that you're going to have in your force. Well, and the Canonist can tank flamer hits no matter what and get some pretty good momentum, but the thing is flamers have a 100% chance to hit, so no matter how high your evasion is, it'll still be able to take down your units, so you need to be very, very careful with that. And then you also have to realize that the Astra Militarum, when their vehicles explode, they have some of the most powerful explosions. I don't know what it is, because if you read their descriptions of the explosion, it doesn't seem like they should be exploding for more damage, but they do, and it does a lot more damage, and it's not uncommon for an explosion to totally squad wipe, say, a Sisters Repentia or something like that. So for all those reasons, I tend not to use those units anymore, but they can be good with how the Sister Repentia have been worked, because you can give them the increased movement, they can use the charge ability to give them more movement, and then they can do tons of damage and lock things down. But like I said, with this build that I'm going to go over, I think there's much more efficient ways of doing it. So in terms of the command point abilities, pretty much all of your command points are going to be a good option. You know, you can give them the Grace ability to give you a critical hit chance and increased ranged hit if you're going more with a ranged build. Obviously, the +1 movement is always going to be beneficial, because you're going to want to be locking guys down as much as you can to let your other units run in there and get kills. And then obviously even the third ability giving you increased damage and armor piercing when you're going to be going against armor. All those things can be amazing. And then for your opponents, they're either going to be trying to use the Valkyrie transport if they're going to try to get rear attacks on your vehicles or important units if you've left your rear open, or trying to use that to get to strategic command locations, because one major advantage that you're going to have as the Adepta Sororitas compared to the Astra Militarum is you're going to have a much more mobile force than they are, so you should be able to run circles around them, especially given all the jetpack infantry and transport capabilities that you have access to compared to the Astra Militarum, so that should work out way better for you. You do need to be cognizant, though, that you're going to likely be killing tons of forces, and that's going to be getting them tons of momentum. And so you don't want to have all your guys close together, because if they start using their Valkyrie runs, that can do pretty decent damage against your rhinos and your infantry units. And then if he's got a bunch of infantry on the field and you're just killing units left and right, you really need to make sure you focus fire down their enemy commander, because if you have guys on the field and they decide to do that death missile strike, that can like squad wipe your whole army, especially if you're doing a heavy infantry build like what I'm going to recommend here. So you need to be very cognizant of where that commander is and get an idea of how many command points your opponent's going to have, because that would be the ultimate way for them to counter your build here. So going through the build here that I recommend is you want to bring the Canonist and you want to give her the Blessed Blade. It's up to you, because you will have some extra points with this build, whether you want to do the Plasma Pistol versus the Condemner Bolt Gun. If you're worried that you're not going to be able to take out some heavier vehicles, or you might not be able to get in a melee, the Plasma Pistol will allow you to have the armor piercing of 5 to be able to do some damage at range. But typically I just use her other abilities, and if there are just some weak infantry around that I can't quite reach, then I just do the Condemner Bolt Gun to just get some kills of the infantry, and it has a little bit longer range. Now you want to do the Blessed Blade because it has 100% accuracy. You will not get any grazes, which can be an absolute disaster, and it also gives you more splash damage, allowing you to get additional stacks of your Rising Faith, because you get 1 stack of Rising Faith per enemy model killed. And if you're attacking their infantry with this, that should pretty much guarantee that you're getting 3+ kills per model, allowing you to trigger your Faith and Fury once you get 5 stacks, which will give you an additional action point and 15% damage for that turn. So that can be absolutely amazing if you can't quite get your momentum to pop off, but you still need an extra action point. So that works out really well. Also, I like to bring 2 Hospitallers with me, because 1, I'll use the Medicus Ministorum here to give everybody 10% bonus HP and minus 10 damage, but more important is you have the Rites of Intercession, and this will give you an extra action point and 10% additional bonus health, and those things will stack. So now you're getting plus 20 health. So I typically will have that get applied to the Canonist here. So now she'll have 3 action points. I'll take, assuming I'm not right next to the vehicle or what I want to kill, then you won't have to do this. But assuming you're not needing the increased movement or the additional melee attack, which
against vehicles makes a lot of sense. You'll activate this, and that'll use up one of your action points. So now you're going from 3 to 2. You've got this. You can then move her to do rear attacks to the vehicles. She'll now get 3 attacks with her base damage amounts. That means you're going to be doing 150 to 240 damage versus a vehicle. That's just one round of attacks, and then you get a second one. If you're killing a tank commander or some other important unit, that by itself can almost be enough for her to surge, and then the vehicle's going to explode in her face, giving her more momentum gains. So that by itself, you should kind of hover over and get an idea if that's going to be able to help you get to where you need to be. If not, you'll use some other units to just about allow you to get the kill, and then use her to finish it off, and then have one of her attacks be against some infantry, and then depending on the amount of kills, you might be able to get that Rising Faith ability, and that'll get you an additional action point. So that means on one turn, you could have upwards of 4 actions with your Canoness here. So she by herself should be able to kill at least 1 vehicle, assuming you're not just doing a head-to-head battle where you're not getting a rear attack, but that can be amazing. And then as you're getting into combat the following turn, if your units are getting killed, she's usually pretty hard to take down against the Astra Militarum. So then as people are dying around her, she should be getting momentum to all your units within that are within 1 tile of her, assuming a unit dies within 5 tiles to get this activated. Then they'll go per unit, so then that allows you to stack up tons of momentum. And then she herself also has a damage mitigation of 15%, so when you're using the Hospitaller with her, now you got a 25% damage reduction, all this evasion going, and you're doing all this damage. Plus, if you're in a situation where you can't quite reach the enemy and you don't want one of those heavy tanks to be attacking you, let's say there's a Lehman Russ or some other vehicle that you don't want to be going, or there's a Bloodthirster and you don't want to, and you're having trouble shooting it down, we'll just go ahead and use the Words of Contempt, so that'll lower the accuracy of the unit, the evasion of the unit. It'll have 50% less movement, so they can't get away from you, and they lose an action point, and that'll also give you a stack of Faith and Fury. The other thing is when you use the Divine Deliverance, this has a 2-turn cooldown, so I like to use that on the first turn as well, because just clicking that button will then get me one of the stacks of the Rising Faith to start with. So now all of a sudden I've got a stack here before I've even gotten into combat, and then I just have to worry about killing 4 units before I can get that Faith and Fury ability up and running. So she just becomes a major powerhouse, and then you can, when she gets attacked, you'll get the Shield of Faith buffs, and then you can convert that over to additional momentum the following turn when you're using the Divine Inspiration. Or if you're later in the game and you're using this, just remember this gives you plus 20% momentum gain, so when you convert this, you'll actually be getting plus 12 per stack of the Shield of Faith, because this does get applied to that as well. So she can just go from kill to kill and just become an unstoppable force. So we kind of talked about why I do the Hospitallers. I'll give the Canoness one of those attacks, and then I'll typically use the other Rites of Intercession on one of the Dominions here, because there's usually going to be some sort of Cadians or Kasserkins, something that are going to be in your way body blocking and trying to protect the tanks, and this will just flame out those guys and give you the kill. And you can kill surprising amounts of Cadians with these Dominions just with doing double flame attacks. And if you're in a position where you can also get that to hit the tank or whatever vehicle you're attacking, just have Suffer Not the Unfaithful going, because that's the standard attack, but then everything that it hits is minus 10 evasion, so that'll make it even easier for you to land attacks against any of those vehicles with your other units. And then when the Hospitallers survive, I usually make them one of the HQ commanders, and then obviously later in the game they have the ability to remove all negative status effects and heal for 50 health. So let's say you have 2 of them, you apply both of those heals to the Canoness. Well, now you've just healed her 100 HP in 1 turn, assuming both the Hospitallers are still alive and able to heal. So that's pretty incredible. The thing to realize, though, is the Rites of Intercession do not stack, so you don't want to apply 1 round of that and then use the other Hospitaller and use it again on the Canoness twice. That will not work. So just be aware of that. And even though it says expires in 2 turns, that expires in 2 turns is the bonus HP, not the additional AP. So sometimes HP, I should say it again, the thing that lasts for 2 turns is the 10% bonus HP, not the AP, just because that could be confusing given that description. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. So after the Deeds of the Fallen campaign came out, they gave you access to these dominions. And so this is what totally changed one of my build options here, is I think now the dominions are way better options than the Celestians, but that may be a hot take. The reason I really like the dominions is they have the flamers, and so now I can take care of any of those weak infantry that are in my way. And then as these models die, and then there's vehicles, well, now I can turn these guys not only into an anti-infantry unit, but with them having crack grenades, they now have access to being an anti-vehicle killer too. So now I have a weapon that's extremely good against heroes and vehicles, and one that's against low-tier infantry. So now I have, with this one unit, it can effectively fight anything that is in my way. And then I also have an option to do a pretty decent debuff. Now, vehicles themselves typically don't have great evasion, but some of the Astra Militarum abilities will allow their HQ commanders surrounded by infantry to get significant amounts of evasion. Now, just using the flamer, which will have 100% chance to hit, will allow you to get past that anyways. But in case you are still struggling to kill the hero, well, just add some evasion penalties to there as well. And then you can also convert their Shield of Faith ability into additional divine inspiration. And then if you haven't used their action points and they're ready to surge, if you empower your crack grenades, that'll give you additional ammo, so then you can keep throwing even more crack grenades out. So it just gets to be just a crazy situation. Now, the Zephyrim are currently broken. I hope that Slytherin is going to repair these units, but in their current state, there's no good reason for you not to bring the Zephyrim out against the Astra Militarum, because these are huge counters to the Astra Militarum. The caveat is that you need to make sure you soak up the Overwatch shots with something else, because the Kasserkin and Cadian shock troops are extremely effective with the sheer amount of volume of fire that they can put out. They can easily suppress the Zephyrim. So you don't want to be using their charge attack here, this Righteous Aura, which counts as a charge attack and gives them 10% melee accuracy and critical hit chance, and you activate that while they're flying. That means they have like 2 movement plus 2 movement is 6 movement plus additional movement with their charge. So you're talking about getting 7-8 squares worth of distance. So you can just use these ladies to just run in there, kill any sentinels that have heavy flamers in there, take them out, or assassinate any heroes commanders that are on the field. And then they land, and assuming that you're not landing them next to a heavy flamer, which is going to be able to kill them the following turn, you now have these amazing armor piercing of 5 units doing 26 to 35 damage. So if any of those vehicles try to run away from you, you can now do significant amounts of damage to them, especially if they turn all the way around and try to run directly away from you, because then you're getting rear attacks on them. And then you also have the option of using your bolt pistols with the blessed ammunition to shoot down any little infantry guys that may be in your way. But this effectively allows you to lock down any of the enemy forces. And if you need to have another unit and you don't have a bunch of infantry that are body blocking you, we'll just use one of those hospitallers with their rites of intercession and give these ladies a double attack. So one will be their charge and then a follow-up. Those 2 attacks by themselves will be enough to kill a sentinel, and will also be enough to kill most of the HQ commanders minus the tank commander, obviously. So this can do significant amounts of damage for you. Likewise, you also have access to the... Oh, and then I forgot to mention, the reason these ladies are broken is because the Grace ability since release has been non-functional. And so what's supposed to happen is the Grace ability is only supposed to be active while you have Seraphim Wings active. And this is effectively the jump pack ability for the Adepta Sororitas. But what happens is once you use Seraphim Wings, they'll land, they still have Grace, and then the Grace ability will continue to be applied even when the jetpack is not active. And that's not how it's supposed to work given the description, but they've never fixed that. Now, this wasn't as big of a deal. I mean, it was always a huge annoyance for players when you were playing with Seraphim, because they're effectively getting some increased evasion and ranged accuracy, making these ladies hit at a higher percentage than what they were supposed to. But it's of critical brokenness now that you have Zephyrim, and the reason for that is they already start with 15 evasion. Now you're giving them 10 plus evasion, so now they're up to 25, and then you use your Rhino, you pop smoke, you give them another 15 evasion, so now you've got these guys to 40 evasion. They're going to get some kills, so they're going to get more evasion with that momentum, and then as they're getting attacked, because attacks are going to be missing them and doing less damage because they're going to get grazes because of all that evasion, then they're going to stack up, and it's not uncommon for these ladies here to get 50, 60 evasion, and it just makes it damn near impossible to kill these girls, because at least with the Inferno pistols, you know, you try to break contact, you get hit with maybe, you know, 1 or 2 models. But with it being 5 different models with the melee, now they have a melee zone of control. They hit way harder than the Inferno pistols do, and they can lock down multiple units. So it just gets to be a really, really bad situation. Even more so because these ladies only cost 85 requisition to get them out on the field. Whereas if you're going to bring the Seraphim with the Inferno pistols, you know, these are 100. So now all of a sudden for 15 less requisition, you're having a unit that is doing tons of damage, hitting above their pay grade, having a broken ability that's making them damn near impossible to kill. And, well, you counter it with flamers, and that's why it's so important that you need to kill their flamer units so you can nullify that ability, because as they're getting more and more armor, even the grenades are not particularly good against these guys, because it'll only hit for maybe 10 to 15 damage per model, and if you're not squad wiping them, all that's doing is giving them a ton of momentum, because it applies damage to every model, which means every model's going to get to do a momentum gain. So that's why this becomes an absolute beast. And likewise, you use the Seraphim to, again, help you lock down all those vehicles. And then the Inferno pistol has 6 armor piercing, so this allows you to do tons of damage. And because it is a ranged weapon, what you'll do is, because you won't want to necessarily have 2 Zephyrim to be attacking a Sentinel and get it exploding in their face, because then they're almost going to be dead. What you'll do is you'll typically want to sacrifice a Zephyrim for the charge attack, lock that Sentinel down into melee, and then bring a Seraphim over there, and at a range 2, just attack with the Inferno pistol and blow up the Sentinel, so only one of your units is going to suffer the explosion damage. So that's kind of the best way to use these two to synergize with each other. Plus, these guys can actually do pretty decent damage against most other units that the Astra Militarum are going to be bringing. The only thing that these guys will really, really suck at taking out is the Cadian shock troops. So you would not want to be trying to take them out with these, or you'll be there all day, because you'll only be killing 1 or 2 models per squad with every attack. And since they have like 9-10 models, that's going to take you forever. So these ladies really suck at clearing those bodies off of strategic command points. But if you're just running around getting kills with everybody else, then you just run in with a flamer, it's a non-issue. Now, I typically like to bring 2 Arcoflagellants. That way we have a unit that can run around and soak up the Overwatch attacks with the Cadian shock troops, any Kasserkin, and also the tanks, because you don't want these powerful units that are doing a charge attack to get suppressed, and you don't want your rhinos to get blown up while you're trying to get into combat. So just running around with these Arcoflagellants will allow you to do soak up surprising amounts of Overwatch. The reason is when units are attacking in Overwatch, it nullifies the splash damage. So, you know, let's say you're charging a Demolisher cannon. Normally that would hit one model and then have a splash of 4. Well, it's just going to hit the one model. Same thing with the any other attack. So it allows these guys, which have, you know, 7 models, to soak up significant amounts of Overwatch. They have 15 evasion. You pop smoke. Now they're up to 30. And then you're running in to soak up a bunch of Overwatch shots. And then you can just run in there with your rhinos and close the distance and start engaging. And then on the following turn, if you need to have just a little bit of movement, you can use their Zealous Frenzy ability, which will give them more movement, more armor piercing, and then you can use these guys to start locking down tanks too. Again, you just have to watch out for heavy flamers because that's how they're going to counter you. And then I do 2 rhinos because they give you the evasion build, the evasion buff. They now can heal 30 HP per turn, so you just plop these guys down on a siege command point after you've unloaded your transport, and you can do significant damage. What I'll typically do for my loadout then is I will have the Canoness use her Divine Deliverance ability. I'll get her into a transport because that'll be on a 2-turn cooldown. She has a Rising Faith. I'll have one of the Hospitalers. Oh, and then, so for the going through the first turn is what I'm doing. So I'll activate Zealous Frenzy. That has a chance of doing 30% damage to each of these models. And so if they take damage, I'll get momentum. And then I'll use the Hospitaler to then heal that damage, so that way they're not weakened. That will give me momentum not only from the damage that these units may have done to themselves, but the Hospitalers gain momentum when they use the Sacred Healing. So now all of a sudden I'm getting significant amounts of momentum gains on the very first turn before we're even fighting, and I have a Rising Face stack. So I'll use that strategy on each of the Arcoflagellants. And then in the transport 1, I will typically put the Canoness, a Hospitaler, and 1 Dominion. And then in transport 2, I'll typically put 2 Dominions and Hospitaler 2, unless I need to use Hospitaler 2 to use the Medicus Menstorum if I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to or that I might need that bonus going to my units before they start engaging. So it's going to be kind of a matchup dependent situation here. But that's typically how I load these guys, because the big thing is with these Rhino transports, they can carry a total of 3 different squads, but they can only do 11 models total. So, you know, this squad has 5, so you could do 2 squads here, that would be 10, and then 1 Hospitaler or 1 Canoness, but you couldn't do 3 Dominions because that would be 15 units, and therefore you'd be running into the model cap. So I just want to clarify that, because sometimes people say, oh, well, look at the Immolator here, it has the same icon, but that is not the case. These can only do 2 units in a total of 5, so you could do like 1 Dominion and 1 HQ unit, but you couldn't do 2 Dominions like you could with the Rhino. So I just want to clarify that, because that can sometimes be real confusing to newer players. So if you use this build, any Astra Militarum player should be absolutely nuked. You know, you'll be able to take out all their vehicles, all their commanders without much issue. And then if they decide to do a heavy infantry build, then you'll just take them out with your flamers. You'll be able to lock the infantry down into melee, and you'll also just be able to chop up all the infantry with your Canoness, allowing her to keep getting additional action points and just kill everybody that's in your way. And your Seraphim can then be used to kill anything, and the Arcoflagellants can lock guys into melee. And then you can even use the Rhinos with their weak-ass Stormbolter to mop up a couple of units if they're doing a big infantry squad. So this should be, like I said, a pretty easy matchup for you. Alternative units that you could use are the Magifier here. She is pretty good. She's got the Bolter, so she attacks the same way as the Sister Superior does with her Bolter, so she can actually mop up some weakened units. But the big thing with her is she's got these buffs, right? And so she can use one of the buffs per turn, and you can do the momentum gains to help you guarantee your kill with the Canoness and getting your momentum to surge. That'll also help your other units that are going to be killing you know, vehicles to get to be able to surge quicker. What a lot of people will do is give the Tales of the... They'll activate the Tale of the Faithful, and then they'll do Tale of the Stoic the next turn, because these last for 2 turns. So now all of a sudden you're getting plus 15% momentum gains, and you have a 15% grace chance. So when you take in plus 15% grace chance and having, 40 plus evasion, that can make these Zephyrim incredibly challenging to kill. The other option is if you know you're going to be attacking at range 2 with your Seraphim to take out a bunch of those flamers, then what you'd want to do is give the Tail of the Warrior to buff the accuracy to these Infernal Pistols, because they have a 20 accuracy fall off when they're not at the optimal range of 1, so that means their base accuracy goes down to 60. Now that's still a pretty decent amount of damage that you're going to dish out with these ones, but if you can drop that down to 70% instead of 60, then that'll guarantee you an additional hit statistically, just with each one of these ladies having 2 attacks. So that's 10 attacks per round, and now you're getting 7 out of 10 of those shots landing instead of 6 out of 10. So that should really help you, and if anything, it may be slightly higher than that because it tends to round up in my experience. Another option is the Sister Superior. She can be very good. You can give her the Power Sword, which will allow her to do significant damage. She has 2 action points, and then she can do 160 to 210 damage against vehicles by herself, and then she'll be locking it down. What most other players will do, though, is the Battle Sermon has been reworked. So if you're going to use this Zephyrim build, have her in the middle of them. Now all of a sudden you use this, and now they're getting plus 15% melee damage when they're doing their attacks. And then on another one, you can give them plus 30 momentum and 15% bonus HP. And if they're already being buffed up with the Medicus Menstorum, now they're getting all this bonus HP and additional damage reduction. It just becomes very OP and very difficult for you to kill. And then once she starts closing the distance and getting into melee, she can chop down those vehicles herself, and then she doesn't care so much about flame attacks or the explosion. She can usually tank those pretty well, so she can be very good at taking down sentinels if you're really struggling to fight those. Another good option is the Celestian Synchro Saints. I tend not to use them too much, but that's not to say they're a bad option. They're pretty heavily armored. They get good damage mitigation, so you can stack that again with the hospital ability. And then as they start to suffer unit losses, they get the Spirit of the Martyrs, which will allow them to increase the damage by 50% per model that's gone. So by the end, they're doing 200% damage when you're down to 1 model, so that can allow, even once they've been killed, to do pretty significant damage against vehicles if you're in commanders, if you're struggling to get the kills. And then you can also use the Oath of Protection to give them additional HP and armor to help them tank any flamer attacks if you're using them to use a zone of control to lock down a heavy flamer unit, so that can work out well for you as well. Now, some people really prefer the Celestians. So for the Flamers cost the same as the Dominions do, but then you don't have a way of fighting vehicles if you only have these ladies left, which is why I don't like them, because even if they get the Spirit of the Martyr with their Flamer, yes, they're going to do amazing damage against infantry, but they're still not going to be doing enough damage with a base of 2 to 3, even doing 200% damage to be able to kill vehicles. Now, what you could do, though, is give them the multi-melta, and now all of a sudden, even as they're suffering model losses, they're going to still be doing significant amounts of damage to vehicles. So if you prefer the multi-melta build, or the melta gun build, that is the option. Now it is slightly more expensive than the Flamer by 10 additional points, but this will give you another option for a good anti-vehicle weapon. It has an optimal range of 2, but I tend to just go with the guaranteed hits with the crack grenade. So for me personally, I think the Dominions are a better option, give me a lot more versatility, but I think you can make a pretty solid argument for the Celestians. Again, the Sisters Repentia, they are like your ultimate anti-vehicle killers, so giving them plus 10 damage per momentum point while they're loaded into the transport. If you use the plus 1 movement command ability, that'll get applied to units even in the Rhino transport, so they'll get that additional movement. So you just unload these ladies and then use that charge attack, and that will give you 20 to 30% additional damage when you're talking about a unit that has 37 to 50 to begin with. If you just happen to have them in the same position as a Sister Superior, then you could potentially give them an additional 15% melee damage, so that would allow these ladies to one-shot a Sentinel. Usually can one-shot down a HQ commander like the Castellan, which can sometimes be hard to kill. And then the big thing is this also allows it so you can't be suppressed. So if you're going to be charging through a bunch of las gun fire or killing a commissar or somebody else that you're worried that the bolt pistol might suppress you. You don't even have to worry about that. And then every time they make an attack, you can get these Absolution of Faith abilities. So, at full stacks, they get plus 25% graze chance. And if you were to stack it with the Tales of the Stoic, all of a sudden you've got a 40% graze chance. But that's pretty unlikely to happen because everything that the Astra Militarum are going to have are going to be able to kill these sisters, and they're usually going to focus fire them down. But this is an alternative option. I don't think it's as good of an alternative option, especially with the Zephyrin being bugged out right now. I think these are vastly superior, especially because they're a little bit less cost, but that is an option. I recommend that you do not bring the Exorcist because you have so many other cheaper options to kill infantry, which is what these are meant for, and then just having a guaranteed 60 to 80 damage isn't worth it. And then, yes, you do have the Devastating Refrain where you have the 3 attacks, which can help you, but again, you have lots of flamer options here. Save these 230 points for something else. The Castigator, I'm kind of on the fence about. It is kind of nice to have a powerful tank. It does 93 to 125 damage, and it has one of the most powerful heavy bolter attacks, but the bolter has a 3-turn cooldown, and then for all the reasons we talked about how the Astra Militarum have changed and they now have better anti-vehicle options, this unit will not be able to pay for itself, so I recommend that you don't bring it, but some players do like to use it, so it is an alternative option, but I think it's a bad one. And then the Immolator, again, I tend not to use the Immolators anymore against the Astra Militarum, where it was one of the backbones of my matchup when I do a transport rush. If you're going to bring them and you want to do the Celestians with the Meltaguns, then you'll want to use the Immolation Flamers. That way you can clear out the infantry and then have your Meltaguns finish them off, or charge in with the Sister Repentia to then kill the vehicle. So it all depends on how you're going to do it. If you're going to be playing as a flamer build, then you're probably going to want to use the twin multi-melta loadout here, so that way you have them to be a powerful anti-vehicle, and then you have the heavy bolter to help you snipe down any HQ commanders or finish off models that are almost been killed. That's how I typically recommend using this. Now, the Paragon Warsuits, I think this can be an exceptionally good matchup for these guys, assuming you have some sort of cover where you can keep them protected. You have a guaranteed Paragon Grenade Launcher, which will squad wipe a Cadian shock troop and practically almost kill a Kasserkin squad, so that can be nice. If you're going to use them, I would recommend that you use the multi-melta loadout, because you may have a little bit of trouble getting them into combat the first turn, and this will allow you to do substantial amounts of damage. And then they also have the Spirit of the Martyr ability, but what happens with the Paragons is they get 2 stacks per model loss, so you lose 1 model, now you're doing, the last 2 models will be doing 100% extra damage. If you lose 2, then your last one's doing 200% damage. And when you're talking about 200% damage to a multi-melta that has 56 to 57 damage, or even your Paragon Warblades, which are doing 45 to 60, times that by 200 plus any other buffs that you're going to have applied, these guys can definitely hit well above their pay grade, and then they can take hits from most of the other non-anti-vehicle killers. So, Kasserkin or Cadians, shock troops are really going to have trouble bringing these guys down unless they're buffed up in other ways. Now, the tanks will be able to drop these guys, which is why you have to be a little bit careful. But these can be very nice too. If you're a big Paragon Warsuit lover, this is the matchup that's going to work out very well for you. Likewise, the Penitent Engine can be a good option, especially if you're going to do the Meltagun build with the Celestians, because you can use these as a heavy flamer that'll allow you to kill the Kasserkin and any shock troops that are in your way. Then you can move them into melee combat to chop down the vehicles or heroes. The big thing to know about this is I was talking about how you can cheese the momentum. You cannot cheese it with the torrent amplifiers. So temporary momentum gains do not count towards your command point abilities. So using the Torment amplifiers or the Sister Superiors Litany of Devotion will not build up your command points counter, because those are temporary command point abilities, or temporary momentum gains. So they will help you get to surging, which will allow you to do additional kills with whatever unit that's applied to. but it will not improve the command point abilities. So at first I thought, oh my gosh, if you just bring a bunch of, you know, Arcoflagellants, you bring the Pendant Engines, you're activating the Tauren amplifiers, their Zealous Frenzy, you're healing, you're using your other abilities. I thought this would maybe just stack and go crazy, but that does not work that way. So just in case somebody's trying to use that that strategy, just be aware, because I was going to try to do that during a tournament match that should be uploaded by now, and that's where I discovered that the temporary momentum does not go towards the command point ability. So I just wanted to flat out tell you that. Now, the Retributors, I really don't like the Retributors. I don't think I made any secret of that. So I tend not to use these ladies. You have better options than their Bolter. You have tons of flamer options. Yes, the heavy flamer, especially after you get it fully kitted out with the maximum cleansing flame. If you give them the armor piercing, all of a sudden these ladies will be doing like 5 or 6 armor piercing if you have the command point abilities, and you know this is fully charged up. You get additional armor piercing here if you have the 4 stack, so then it's 3 and then 4, and then you start adding additional damage on, and you have all these shots that can allow these heavy flamers actually to take down vehicles. But it's just so micro intensive, it's just not going to be a good option. And then yes, the multi-meltas here can do significant damage, especially with the Strike of Faith, but you know, you're talking about 130 points to get these ladies out here, and they don't have crack grenades anymore, so as they're suffering model losses, they're just not as powerful. So it's like, just bring the Dominions for the crack grenade, or use the Celestians with the Melta guns. It's just a much better option. So I feel like the Retributors need to get a rework, but I'm not quite sure the best way to do it where they wouldn't be too push it too far one way or the other. So hopefully smarter minds than me can figure out that option. And then the other unit I do not bring are the Battle Sisters. Again, yes, they have the grenades, which are really nice for killing infantry, and then they can use the blessed ammo to do a little bit of damage to vehicles or medium tier infantry and things, but you just have so many better options with everything else we just walked through that I tend not to waste the points here on these ladies on this matchup. So with that, I hope this will let you have a lot of success with the Adepta Sororitas versus the Astra Militarum. I think if you follow this game plan, you should be curb stomping most Astra Militarum players. I would say, me personally, just through my experience, I would say I win 90+% of my matchups with the Adepta Sororitas versus the Astra Militarum. I find that they really struggle. One thing that I've been finding that some players have been doing is the Basilisk play has been coming back again. So I didn't specifically mention that, but just be aware that if you do have an Astra Militarum player that you know likes to bring Basilisk, you may not want to have all your guys grouped together, because if that Basilisk does land a bunch of attacks, when it gets the 3 attacks on that one round, that can be an absolute nightmare if that were to be taking out your Zephyrim or Seraphim at the very start before they even get to be engaged. So just be very, very cautious of that. And if you do see one, after you take out those Flamers, if you know your guys are going to be all stuck together, then you probably want to focus fire down the Basilisk too, so it doesn't get to hit above its pay grade. Now, thankfully, the Basilisk, unlike the Exorcist, does not get to manually choose where it's shooting, so a lot of the times it'll miss. But again, if you have all 3 of your 3 things stacked together because you're planning on using the Hospitaller to use the Medicus Ministorum ability to buff everybody around there, if a Basilisk decides this is a square it's going to shoot, then that's going to guarantee it's going to land all 3 attacks here, because it'll randomly land on any square around the spot that it is, and if it's all full of units, that's all a shit ton of damage that they're going to do against you. So just be very, very cautious. And then the other thing to be aware of is the Ogrins. If they do their charge attack and they land it, that's enough to pretty much kill a lot of your infantry here and really mess you up. So just be a little bit cautious and really appreciate the significance that even a single model Ogrin being left over, you need to kill that guy because he can do a charge attack, and that's the equivalent of a flamer, and that will really hurt you and allow him to cross some distance because he can charge through multiple units, and that will also lower your evasion. So just be aware and make sure you're killing any Ogrins that may be left over on the squad as well. So with that, I'm going to sign off for the day. I hope you're enjoying this video, and I hope it's going to be very successful for you. If you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe. Encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.